Hey guys, tonight we're digging our bare feet into warm red earth, where the air tastes faintly like rust, and something ancient stirs just beneath the surface. You're standing at the edge of a small village somewhere between the Sahel and the savannah, where smoke curls lazily from mud chimneys, and the buzz of cicadas blends with the low crackle of distant flames. The wind carries something more than dust. It carries memory. You smell charcoal, goat dung, iron oxide, and a tinge of nervous sweat that might be yours. There's a thrum in the ground here, like the soil remembers something you've forgotten. Fires used to rage just below your heels. Smelters once bent nature to their will, not with coal-powered blast furnaces or industrial steel presses, but with their hands, their breath and secrets whispered only after dark. This isn't Rome. This isn't Damascus. This is older, stranger, and if you're not careful, it might eat you alive. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Medieval African iron smelting wasn't just dangerous, it was considered otherworldly. To strike the wrong rhythm on the bellows or disrespect the spirits of the flame was to risk more than burns. You risked being unmade. No pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you are right now. I'm always amazed by how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward following a barefoot boy who's humming something that sounds like a prayer. He doesn't look back, just gestures with his chin toward the heart of the village. You pass low huts painted with ash symbols. Women crouch beside cooking fires. They don't meet your eyes, but they don't need to. You're the outsider. They can smell it. One of the elders raises his hand, not in welcome, but in permission. You are allowed to witness. Your guide stops at a circular pit lined with hardened mud and bone-charred clay. It's long dormant now, filled with dry leaves and goat prints, but it thrums with story. This was once the village's bloomery, its sole furnace. You crouch beside it. The clay walls are cracked but still warm, like they haven't fully given up the memory of fire. Historians still argue whether these furnaces were built above ground or below, freestanding or partially buried. Truth is, it probably varied. What we know, what you feel, is that each furnace was shaped to fit the rhythm of its builders, their seasons, their ancestors, their fears. This one, it has teeth. The rim is jagged like a grin. A young man approaches carrying something in a woven reed basket. He tilts it toward you. Iron ore, crumbled like chunky cinnamon. It sparkles under your fingers. You resist the urge to taste it. Don't worry, someone else did that centuries ago. They called it eating the spirit of the mountain. It did not go well. The ore was often dug by hand. No pulleys, no dynamite. Just a sharpened stick, a strong back, and luck. You're told of one man who claimed he could smell iron deposits like a truffle pig. Another swore the location came to him in dreams. Some modern geologists scoff. Others have begun to test theories involving magnetoreception. Science hasn't caught up to intuition yet. The village once buzzed with smelting, dozens of furnaces, bellows like lungs heaving through the night. You imagine it, a skyline of orange halos, the smell of scorched air, the sound of prayers stitched between hammer strikes. These weren't blacksmiths. Not yet. These were smelters, the alchemists of earth and fire. You run your fingers along the furnace's inside curve. It's smoother than you expect, ash-polished. The outer edge bears scratch marks, as if something once crawled out. You don't ask. A child skips past you holding a lump of something black and metallic. Slag, waste from a smelt gone right or very wrong. He holds it like a toy. Someone nearby winces. Even today, some believe slag can carry curses if mishandled. A whisper behind you, it's sleeping. You turn, no one's there. A breeze picks up and the furnace exhales a puff of dust. Your skin prickles. Maybe it's just the wind, maybe not. The past clings hard in places like this. If you're going to survive the night and maybe even earn the ancestors' patience, you'll need to listen. Not just hear, but listen. To the rustle of dried leaves on the thatched roofs. To the low hum of women grinding millet nearby. To the faint rattle of something metallic swinging from the trees, charms, they say, to keep jealous spirits at bay. To the sound of your own breath quickening. You are not alone. You never were. You're awake before the sun, not by choice, but because the village doesn't believe in letting you sleep through the real work. Someone raps on the side of your hut with a knuckle wrapped in cloth. You roll over, blinking in the pre-dawn haze, and someone mutters, or waits for no one. You're learning that here iron is not just a resource, it's a temperament. It demands patience when you're tired, strength when you're weak, and attention even when it's trying to kill you. Outside, the world is gray-blue. The trees cast long shadows and the air is cooler than you expect. A group has already gathered near the edge of the village, barefoot and quiet, their hands carrying tools older than written language, digging sticks, wooden bowls, leather satchels. You're handed one without explanation. It's your turn to go find the earth's bones. The journey to the ore site is longer than you'd like. You pass baobab trees wide enough to hold secrets, termite mounds that seem to pulse faintly with heat, and stretches of red clay ground that stick to your toes like warm wax. The boy from yesterday is with you again. He hums something tuneless. You're pretty sure it's mocking you. You stop at a clearing where the ground dips slightly, not quite a hill, not quite a pit. Your guide kicks at a patch of dry grass, then starts digging not with speed but with ceremony. You copy him, badly. Soon you're scraping past roots and rocks, and then you see it a vein of earth that crumbles differently in your hands. It's darker, denser, and sparkles faintly in the light. You've found ore. This is laterite, one of the common iron ores in sub-Saharan Africa. Rich in iron oxide, it can look deceptively dull until you catch it at the right angle. Then it glints like a secret trying to escape. Mainstream history often skips this part. We're told metallurgy came from the north, from Egypt, or the Mediterranean, but evidence now suggests that independent smelting traditions were already rooted deep in Africa long before the pharaohs had time to blink. Historians still argue whether the Nok civilization of Nigeria, with its eerily advanced terracotta figures, discovered iron smelting on their own or borrowed it from others. What's not debated anymore, that Africans knew what to do with iron. Very, very well. You fill your satchel, slowly separating the richer chunks from the dust. Every piece is judged by touch. Smell, sometimes even taste, though you're gently told not to lick the ore. A girl in the group grins at you and whispers, "Unless you want to see your future too early." You laugh, but she doesn't. You pause under a baobab tree for shade and drink water from a calabash. The old man next to you tells a story of a prospector who could sense ore with his elbow. You're not sure if he's joking until he rolls up his sleeve and shows you a scar. "Too good at it," he mutters. There's a rhythm to this labor, a kind of meditation in the repetition. You lose track of time. The sun rises higher and your satchel grows heavier. You begin to understand why entire families once dedicated generations to ore gathering. It wasn't just a task, it was a rite. Suddenly, the group leader holds up his hand. Everyone stops. He points to a spot nearby where the ground has caved slightly inward, a soft crater. "Old pit," he says. "Smelters before us." You step closer, peering into it. Charcoal fragments still cling to the walls. You're looking at a memory buried in dirt. Some say these craters are like ghosts. The village doesn't build over them, doesn't farm near them. They're left alone like graves. You wonder how many furnaces lie sleeping beneath the modern landscape, how many ancient techniques were never written down, but encoded in calloused fingers passed from parent to child until the chain broke. Quirky fact for the day, some groups believed ore grew like a crop, slowly regenerating in the earth, if left alone for long enough. It wasn't entirely metaphorical. Geological processes can concentrate iron over time, but It makes you see the ground differently, less like a resource, more like a living thing. By midday, your back is aching and your hands are stained orange. You return to the village with your satchel slung over one shoulder, feeling every ounce of it. No one cheers. This isn't a heroic quest. It's Tuesday. You tip your satchel into a sorting pit and a woman nearby begins grading the ore with the precision of a jeweler. She nods at one chunk and sets another aside. You try to follow her reasoning. She smirks. You'll get it. Or you won't. The furnace is still cold but no longer silent. Around it, preparations have begun. A pile of charcoal sits beside stacked clay bricks. Someone has already drawn the sacred spiral into the dirt. You notice a boy tracing the spiral with his finger whispering under his breath. Later, you ask someone what it means. They shrug. Maybe a prayer. Maybe math. Who knows? You lie in your hut that night, exhausted and wired at the same time. You smell like metal and bark and something deeper. You close your eyes and see the ground shifting like it's alive, like it's dreaming too. The smell hits you before your eyes are fully open. Clay dung charcoal dust baked into the morning like a sour perfume. You cough once, sit up and realize that the air is different today. Heavier, tense, like the village is holding its breath. You step outside and blink against the brightness. The furnace is being born. It sits at the center of a clearing, like a creature mid-hatching. Still half-formed, its belly open, its mouth a gaping hole in the clay. Around it, people work silently, some pounding mud, others shaping bricks, and a few just watching like they're waiting for it to speak. You're handed a bowl of wet clay and pointed toward a spot on the wall. The clay is warm, sticky, and smells suspiciously like something that's come out of both ends of a goat. You smear it on anyway. Everyone's hands look like this. You blend in better when you stink. The furnace is what's called a bloomery, a shaft furnace made of clay and other local materials. Its job isn't to melt the iron completely like modern blast furnaces do, but to coax it slowly into a solid bloom, a mass of spongy iron laced with slag. The process is slow, imperfect, and requires more instinct than chemistry. You learn that furnace construction is not just engineering, it's choreography. The walls must curve a certain way, the tuyere. That's the fancy word for air vents have to be angled just right, and the whole thing must dry just enough before lighting. Otherwise, it could collapse mid-smelt. Or worse, explode. Historians still argue whether these furnaces were purely functional or also symbolic. The fact that some were built with deliberate asymmetries, one side thicker than the other or shaped like a womb, suggests there's more going on than physics. Some archaeologists whisper about ritual engineering. Others roll their eyes. You're starting to think both might be right. A small fire has been lit off to the side. Not in the furnace, this is just to start drying the clay. The smoke curls upward, catching on the underside of tree branches. A child dances near it and no one stops her. Fire here is not something to be feared. It's to be watched, befriended, maybe bribed a little. Quirky bit of trivia: in certain cultures, smelting furnaces were built only during certain phases of the moon. Some insisted on waxing moons for growth, others waning moons for release. You ask about it. A woman shrugs. You don't argue with the moon, she says. Fair enough. As the furnace takes shape, stories swirl around it like dust. One man tells of a furnace that sang during a smelt, actual melody, not just the wind. Another insists a furnace once refused to light for 3 days, until a chicken was sacrificed. You ask if that still happens. He looks at you and says, "Do you still believe in Wi-Fi when you can't see it?" Touché. You're assigned to charcoal duty next. Turns out charcoal isn't just any burnt wood. It's made specifically for this purpose: certain trees, certain burn times, certain stacking methods. The goal is to create dense, clean-burning fuel that reaches iron-seducing temperatures. It crackles like brittle candy between your fingers. You carry baskets of it toward the furnace, careful not to stumble. Charcoal is precious. It's not just fuel, It's transformation. A furnace with bad charcoal is like a song sung off key. You might still get iron, but it'll sulk the whole way. By now, the furnace is standing tall, roughly chest height, its surface scarred with fingerprints, its mouth sealed shut with a clay plug. It's drying slowly, carefully. You're told it'll rest for a day before lighting. Like a bride before her wedding, one man jokes. Everyone laughs except the elder, who mutters something and spits into the dust. You pretend not to notice. You help shape the tuyere, short ceramic tubes that will funnel air into the belly of the furnace. They're made from the same clay dried in the sun and fit snugly into holes near the base. You blow into one. The elder gives you a side eye. Don't breathe into it unless you're ready to give it your soul, he says. Right, noted. You sit back at the end of the day, hands crusted in clay, feet sore, and heart oddly full. The furnace stands like a totem in the clearing. No fire yet, no roar, just potential. You hear the boy from yesterday whisper something to it, something soft and rhythmic like a lullaby. You ask what he said. Telling it what I want, he says. A good smelt, strong bloom, no surprises. You ask if it works. He shrugs. Sometimes. As night falls, the air cools, but the furnace still radiates warmth. You think of all the others built like this, in other times, other villages. Some were destroyed, some forgotten, some simply abandoned when the trees ran out or the stories stopped being told. You wonder, what does a furnace dream of before it wakes? You wake to a rhythm, not a drum, not quite, more like breath, a syncopated womp-womp that rises and falls, as steady as a heartbeat. You stumble out of your hut, still half dreaming, and there it is. The furnace is alive. Two young men are perched on either side of it, their feet pumping long leather bellows. They work in shifts, legs moving like pistons, barely speaking. You watch the air snake through the tuyères, feeding the fire from below. And when you lean in, you hear it deep inside the clay. Something is growing. You're told the fire was lit just before dawn, fed gradually with charcoal and breath. No kerosene, no shortcuts. A smelting furnace like this isn't ignited, it's persuaded. The village watched as the flames took hold, rising in thin columns, then fattening, then curling back on themselves like serpent smoke. Now ours in the fire is a presence. You can feel it through the soles of your feet. The air shimmers around the furnace. A low hum pulses from its core. The elders say that once the smelt begins, the furnace becomes a mouth that must be fed until it's full. So you carry more charcoal, always more. You're given a turn at the bellows. It's harder than it looks. Your thighs burn. Your hands slip on the handles. You pump too fast, then too slow, and are gently nudged aside by someone with better rhythm. You laugh it off, but it stings a little. The fire knows who it trusts. There's a constant negotiation happening here between airflow heat and time. Too much air, and you burn away the iron before it can bloom. Too little, and you get nothing but slag. The bellows, the tuyères, even the kind of charcoal, all of it must be tuned like an orchestra. And if you're off-key, the furnace sulks or explodes. No big deal. Mainstream historical fact. Break African bloomery furnaces, particularly those in regions like Tanzania and Burkina Faso, were known for reaching astonishingly high temperatures, sometimes over 1200 degrees I, without any metal tools, just clay charcoal and know-how. European travelers in the 19th century couldn't believe what they saw. Some called it witchcraft, others called it impossible. But the slag piles said otherwise. Historians still argue whether these smelters operated with conscious metallurgy principles or just accidental engineering. But when you see the furnace breathing like this, you know accidents don't last centuries. Nearby, a woman tosses dried plantain skins into the fire. You ask why. For the ancestors, she says. Also smells better than goat dung. She grins. You believe her. The smelters take turns chewing something bitter and spitting it into the dirt. A root, maybe. You're told it keeps the spirits calm, Also maybe helps with the smoke in the lungs. You try it. It tastes like regret. Overhead, a hawk circles. The old man from yesterday squints up at it and mutters, "Good omen, unless it poops on you." You move slightly to the left. Time here warps. The smelt can take an entire day, sometimes longer. As the hours stretch, the fire changes color from orange to yellow, then white-hot. The inside of the furnace glows like the sun's mouth, and no one dares turn their back on it for long. The furnace is not done until it says so. Quirky tidbit: in some cultures, a smelter would marry the furnace for the duration of the smelt, speaking to it, feeding it, sometimes even sleeping beside it. The furnace was both bride and beast, and its mood could not be trusted. At one point the fire dips unexpectedly. A hush falls. Everyone looks at the bellows team. One of the young men winces, nods, and picks up the pace. Slowly the glow returns. Someone exhales. A child claps once and is immediately shushed. The furnace is moody today. You catch sight of the ore being added. Crushed and sorted earlier, it's now drizzled into the furnace in small offerings mixed with charcoal in just the right ratio. You're warned not to toss in too much, it'll choke, someone says. You nod solemnly. A choking furnace sounds deeply unpleasant. As the sun sets, the sky turns bruised and the clearing glows red. The smelters move more slowly now, coated in sweat and ash. Bellows still pump. Charcoal still crackles. The fire never stops. You sit beside the elder and ask how he knows when it's ready. He looks at you like you've asked how he knows he's hungry. You feel it, he says. When it starts to groan, when the sparks change, when it smells, done. You nod, like that explains everything. Maybe it does. The stars blink on and the furnace breathes steady. The bloom is forming. Somewhere inside, the ore is separating from its earthly crust, shaking off rock and impurity and becoming something new. Not molten, not liquid, but semi-solid, a dense glowing brain of metal. It's not born yet, but it's dreaming of shape. You close your eyes and listen. The fire doesn't roar anymore. It purrs. You wake to murmurs quiet and reverent. The sun hasn't fully risen, but the clearing is already alive with anticipation. The furnace has stopped breathing. It's time. You shuffle forward with the others' eyes still grainy from smoke and sleep, and gather in a loose semicircle around the bloomery. The air is cooler now, but heat still radiates from the furnace like a heartbeat echoing through stone. No bellows, no flames, just silence and sweat. Today is extraction day. The furnace looks different somehow, more solid, more secretive. It's been sealed overnight with a fresh layer of clay, locking in the final hours of transformation. Inside, somewhere buried in ash and slag, lies the bloom, a heavy, spongy mass of newly formed iron. You're told it's not metal yet, not really, not until it's free. A man approaches with a wooden rod and taps along the side of the furnace. It sounds dull in some places, sharp in others. He nods to himself, grunts, then gestures. Two others step forward with clay scrapers and begin the delicate task of breaking the furnace open. You expect a dramatic burst, a dragon's exhale of flame. Instead, it's more like surgery, slow, precise, a ritual in fragments. Clay comes away in sheets, revealing blackened slag layers of charcoal, and finally something else, something dense and glowing faintly red in the heart of the soot. The bloom. It doesn't look like treasure, not yet. It looks like a hunk of meteorite dropped from an angry sky. Misshapen, cratered, and crusted with charcoal, but it's beautiful in its own ugly way, alive with potential. Mainstream metallurgy defines this as the bloom stage, where iron particles clump together under intense heat forced into cohesion by fire, airflow, and pressure. No melting, no pouring, just becoming. Historians still argue whether African smelters truly understood the chemical nuances of reduction, or if it was all intuitive experimentation. But then isn't that how all science starts? Someone burns their fingers until it works. The smelters don't cheer when they pull the bloom out. They grunt, they nod, one spits in the dirt. Celebrating too early invites disaster. The bloom is laid on a flat rock and examined. Bits of slag are chipped away, some with sticks, others with quick slaps of a wooden paddle. You get closer. The heat scorches your eyebrows. You lean in anyway. Then out of nowhere, someone smears a line of red ochre across your forehead. You blink. You helped feed it, the elder says. Now it knows your name. Oh, okay. Apparently this is a good thing. Quirky custom in several regions, including parts of present-day Cameroon and Niger. It was customary to mark first-time smelters with ochre or ash, essentially baptizing them into the world of iron. Some even shaved a line in the apprentice's hair. You glance around nervously. So far, no one's reaching for clippers. The bloom, still glowing, is now ready to be consolidated. This is where the fun begins. It's carried by 2 men and a third for balance to a large, flat anvil stone. The surrounding ground is cleared and tools appear. Wooden hammers, stone blocks, metal tongs that look more ceremonial than functional. No factory precision, just weight and rhythm. Then the beating starts. A slow, steady percussion as the smelters strike the bloom, hammering out slag and compressing the iron. Sparks fly. Slivers of hot waste crackle in the air. It smells like lightning and roasted blood. You flinch at the first few strikes, then lean in, drawn by the music of it. This is not forging that comes later. This is bloom dancing. Each strike pushes impurities to the surface, folding the mass tighter, tougher, denser. You can hear it changing. The early strikes sound hollow, chaotic. Then gradually, thud, thud, tink, the tone shifts. Clearer, tighter, like a bell finely tuned. Someone hands you a wooden mallet. You hesitate. Try it, a smelter says. Speak to it. You lift the mallet and bring it down, unsure, slightly off-center. It lands with a dull whump. They nod anyway. Better than some, the elder murmurs. Worse than most. You'll take it. The bloom shrinks as the slag bleeds away bit by bit. A crust is forming, darker, more solid. The strikes grow sharper, more rhythmic. The work is exhausting, but there's a rhythm to it, a logic you don't quite grasp, but your body begins to mimic. By mid-morning, the bloom is no longer red-hot. It's a dull, smoky gray, cooled, compressed, and ready to be reborn. Someone whispers, "It's awake now." And just like that, the smelters step back. No applause, no triumph, just reverence. The elder picks up a chunk of leftover slag and holds it out to you. "Keep this," he says, "in case you forget what it cost." You take it. It's heavier than it looks. The bloom sits on a woven mat, like a sleeping animal, warm, dense, unpredictable. It's cooled now, barely steaming, but no one touches it without purpose. The hammering has stopped, but a kind of echo lingers in the air, like the village itself is still vibrating from the strikes. You crouch beside it, tracing the ridges and creases in its rough skin. It's hard to believe this lump came from crushed rock, fire, and breath. Harder still to believe that this lump will soon become tools, weapons, ornaments, things that outlive the hands that shape them. But before that, you're told there's something you need to understand. Smelting here isn't just mechanical, it's mythological, spiritual. The fire you helped stoke, the ore you helped carry, the bloom now steaming on the mat. They are all part of something older than metallurgy textbooks and deeper than chemistry. They are part of the fire lineage. You're pulled aside by one of the elders, the quiet one with the gap-toothed grin, who always seems half listening to something you can't hear. He motions for you to follow. You do, because what else are you going to do? Say no to a man who just woke the earth. He leads you behind the village, past drying millet, into a small hut alone at the edge of the forest. It's built like the others, mud thatch worn with time, but it's different. It feels different. Still, dense. The air inside is thick with herbs and charcoal and something metallic on your tongue. You've entered the smith's hut, but not just any smith. This is the place of ritual isolation, a sacred quarantine for those who work with iron. In many African cultures, the smelter or smith was not just a craftsman, but a liminal figure, revered, feared, both. Mainstream historical fact. Among the Dogon of Mali and the Manda-speaking peoples of West Africa, smiths were often considered members of distinct social classes. They married within their group, lived apart, and even had their own origin stories. In some traditions, they were said to descend from the first beings who shaped the world from fire. Historians still argue whether these divisions were born from respect or suspicion. Was the smith sacred or simply dangerous? Maybe both. You can't summon fire without burning something. Inside the hut, tools hang from pegs, not many, just enough. A hammer, tongs, a strange crescent-shaped blade, a smooth stone worn down like soap. Each item radiates presence like it's been waiting for you, or judging you. Hard to say. The elder picks up a blade and sets it on the ground between you. Then he does something unexpected. He kneels. He begins to hum not a tune but a drone, a low chest-borne sound that makes the walls feel closer. He places one hand on the bloom you carried earlier and closes his eyes. You watch. A moment later he stops. Iron listens, he says. It remembers who speaks gently. You ask him what he means. He points to the blade on the floor. This was a hoe, then a spear, then a necklace. He smiles. Now, maybe a knife. Metal changes, but it remembers. Quirky belief. Some cultures in East and West Africa believe that iron carried memory. Tools, weapons, even slag could hold emotional residue, rage, love, grief. A spear made in anger might break at the wrong moment. A hoe forged with patience might yield better crops. You laugh thinking it's metaphor. He does not laugh with you. You're invited to sit, not on a mat, on the dirt, the earth. You're told that if you want to shape iron, you must first be still enough to hear it. So you sit and wait, and wait. And in that silence you notice strange things, your breath slowing, your spine relaxing, the sound of someone pounding millet 3 huts away, the pulse in your fingers. The elder breaks the silence with a question. Do you know what iron fears? You pause. Firewater. Nothing, he says. That's the problem. Iron has no fear, he explains. No morals, no mind of its own. It becomes whatever the hand shapes it into. A plow, a sword, a door hinge, a slave chain. It doesn't care. That's why we do, he says. We care, so it won't forget. Outside, the village is beginning to stir again. Children laugh. Someone calls for water, but inside this hut, time doesn't move. You ask why the smiths live apart. He smiles. Because we listen to metal, and sometimes it listens back. You leave the hut hours later, unsure if you've learned anything useful or everything. The bloom is gone from the mat, taken to the next stage. You weren't invited to see where, not yet. Maybe iron remembers. But tonight, you'll remember too. The village smells different tonight, sharper, metallic, laced with something almost like ozone. The bloom is gone from the mat, but it hasn't vanished. It's changing again. And you are invited to witness its rebirth. You follow the same path as before, past sleeping goats and crackling fires, toward a smaller hut behind the smith's compound. This one isn't for isolation, it's for transformation. The forge. Inside, the air thrums. A charcoal bed glows in a wide, shallow pit. 2 young men pump bellows again, but this isn't the rhythmic heaving of smelting. This is faster, more urgent, like breath in a sprint. And above that charcoal, resting on a flat anvil stone, is a slice of the bloom cut away from the original lump. It's dull gray now, crusted over, but as the heat rises, it starts to shine faintly. The outer slag softens, flakes off in bursts. You see veins of red-hot metal twitch beneath the crust like muscle under skin. This is the forge welding phase. The smith heats the bloom fragment just enough to make it malleable, then hammers it to expel more slag and shape it. It's not unlike kneading dough if your dough weighed 5 kilos and could burn through your leg. Mainstream metallurgy time. This part of the ironworking process is called consolidation and secondary forging. Many African smiths would reheat the bloom multiple times, folding and hammering it until it reached the desired consistency. No molds, no casting, just muscle rhythm and ridiculous heat tolerance. Historians still argue whether African smiths invented their techniques independently or inherited them through ancient trade networks. But at this point, you don't really care. What you're watching feels too personal to be borrowed. The smith lifts the iron with long-handled tongs and lays it on the anvil. He strikes once, twice. The clangs are sharp and bright. Sparks scatter across the dirt floor like fireflies escaping a jar. The iron flattens, thickens, stretches. You can almost hear it groaning. Quirky details: some blacksmiths in Ghana, Niger, and the Congo Basin would sing to their iron as they worked. Not words exactly, but tones, notes, vibrations. Some said it helped the metal find its shape. Others said it kept the evil spirits guessing. The smith here doesn't sing, but he hums low and deep, and you feel it in your chest. You're invited to try again. They hand you a smaller hammer this time and point to a warm bar of partially shaped iron. You hesitate, then strike. It rings like a bell. The iron jumps under your blow, and a few sparks shoot up and nip your wrist. You suck in a breath. The smith nods. Good, he says. It knows you now. The bar begins to look like something long, tapered, elegant. A blade, a tool. You're not sure yet, but you see lines forming, purpose emerging. The smith dips it briefly in water. Steam hisses. He inspects the curve, turns it over, taps a few spots, then back into the fire. This is not mass production. This is metal meditation. You ask what he's making. A story, he replies. You laugh, thinking it's a joke. It's not. Because here's the thing. Every tool, every weapon, every object made from this bloom will carry this moment. This fire, these hands, this village. It's not just about utility. It's about memory. The smith holds up a finished tool from yesterday's batch. It looks simple, a narrow hoe head worn smooth. But he cradles it like a newborn. This one, he says, is for Mama Fati. She's old, her land is tough. So I made the neck thicker. It won't chatter when it hits stone. You blink. You didn't even realize tools could be personalized like that. But of course they can. Of course they are. You glance around and notice a row of objects hanging on the wall. Hoes, spears, small knives, all unique, all variations on a theme, and each one you realize is a record, a fossil of flame and muscle and need. The smith wipes his brow and grins. Metal listens, he says again. We just have to give it something worth hearing. Outside, the sky is velvet black. Crickets chirp like squeaky hinges. A dog barks once, then hushes. You sit beside the forge warmed by the dying coals and think about what it means to shape something. Not just cut it, not just hit it until it behaves, but shape it. With care, with intention, with memory. You think about everything that's already changed since you arrived. Your hands, your breath, the way you look at dirt. You glance at the hammer you used. It's not much, but it's heavier now than when you picked it up. Maybe that's the iron, maybe that's you. There's a shift in the village atmosphere the next morning, less urgency, more ceremony. The smelting is over. The bloom has been beaten, split, and shaped. And now it's time for the metal's naming. You're not told this in so many words. No one declares a festival, but you can feel it. There's fresh ash drawn in curling patterns across the packed earth paths. People wear cleaner wraps. The children aren't running wild, they're watching. Everyone's watching. In the center of the village, a fire has been built. Not as hot as the furnace, not as small as a cook fire. This one is for display. Around it, a few newly forged tools lie waiting: a hoe, a small blade, a flat chisel, and a short iron staff. Their surfaces shimmer faintly in the early light. They aren't polished. They're not meant to be pretty. They're meant to be seen. One of the elders, the one with clouded eyes and a voice like cracked bark, steps forward. He doesn't speak at first. He walks slowly, circling the fire, tapping each tool with the tip of a carved stick. The metal rings softly, different tones, different voices. You lean in. So does everyone else. And then he speaks. not in a booming voice, not in some grand announcement, but gently. A whisper that the fire seems to catch and carry. This one, he says, pointing to the hoe, will break the stubborn soil at the north edge. It shall be named Mutu wa Maji, strength of water. He moves to the next. This blade cuts for no blood. It shall shape gourds and thread vines. Name it Niasi because it bends. Each item is named, not metaphorically, literally, like a person, like a child. Mainstream historical fact. In many African societies, particularly in regions of Central and West Africa, tools and weapons, especially those made from freshly smelted iron, were often named. This wasn't just poetic flair. Naming imbued the object with identity, purpose, and spirit. It was believed to bind the iron's intent to its use. Historians still argue whether this was universal practice or specific to certain regions and castes. But what they all agree on, iron wasn't just matter, it was will. You're handed a long chisel with a dark stripe running down its shaft. You remember seeing it shaped yesterday, your own hesitant hammering part of its birth. You turn it in your hands. It feels patient, like it's waiting for you to say something. A girl beside you, maybe 9 years old, whispers, "Don't name it fast, it remembers." Of course it does. You whisper Kimya. It means silence or peace, depending on dialect. The girl nods solemnly like you passed some test you didn't study for. The elder seems pleased. He sprinkles something into the fire, herbs, maybe bark. It sparks blue for a moment, then returns to orange. Another elder claps once. The naming is complete. And now comes the sacred part. A man steps forward wearing only a wrap and ash smeared across his chest. He holds a larger tool, a spearhead heavy and elegant, not yet mounted. He kneels, presses it to the ground, and begins to speak. A chant, a plea, maybe a warning. You learn this is the activation, the spiritual ignition of a tool meant for power. Not all iron gets this, only some, those made for war or ritual or harvest blessings. It's said that iron used without its proper spirit bound can rebel. It can fail at crucial moments. It can betray. Quirky belief in some traditions, iron tools that misbehave, hoes that snap, early blades that warp, are said to be homesick. Returned to the earth too soon or shaped in a rush, they carry resentment. They're sometimes buried with chants or even burned to calm them. You ask someone if this is superstition. They look at you like you just insulted gravity. It's not about belief, they say. It's about respect. If you can't respect the thing that feeds you, you don't deserve to use it. Fair. The ceremony ends with food, of course. Not a feast, but a communal meal. Thick porridge, stewed greens, ground nuts roasted in iron pots so old they seem fossilized. You eat beside a man sharpening one of the tools made yesterday. He moves slowly, steadily, like he's shaving memory into the blade. You ask how long a tool lasts. He smiles. Depends who uses it. Some last seasons, some last lifetimes, some... He points at the chisel in your hand. Some get lost in the river and show up 30 years later in another village. You laugh, but he doesn't. You're starting to lose track of what's myth and what's record. And maybe that's the point. As dusk rolls in, the tools are collected, wrapped in cloth, and distributed. One goes to a farmer, another to a weaver. One is set aside for burial with a man who died last moon. Iron returns to iron. And you're told to sleep with your chisel under your bedroll. Let it learn your breath, they say. You don't ask why. You just do it. The night feels heavier with the chisel beneath your bedroll. You don't sleep deeply. Not because you're afraid it will bite you in your sleep, though someone did make that joke, but because your dreams feel warmer, thicker. Like iron in the forge, you're not entirely solid anymore. When morning breaks, the village is quiet. Not in a sleepy way, in a sacred one. You step outside and sense a subtle shift. People speak in hushed voices. No children run through the dust. Smoke rises slowly from a few cook fires curling like it's hesitant to stretch. You're beckoned without words by an old woman with a necklace made of nails. She leads you toward a small circular hut near the edge of the village, half covered in climbing vines and shaded by an enormous tamarind tree. The door is short, the roof unusually low. You duck to enter. Inside, the air is cool and still. There's no fire, no tools, only a woven mat, a clay bowl of herbs, and in the center, set like a relic, is a curved, worn blade. This is the isolation hut. This is where the smith sleeps when he's shaping tools of power, or when he's just finished a smelt and must be separated. You're told this isn't punishment. It's protection for everyone. Because contact with iron, especially fresh iron, is risky. Not in the burn-your-fingers way, in the spiritually volatile way. A newly forged tool isn't just metal, it's raw, potential, unshaped energy. And the person who makes it becomes charged too. Mainstream historical fact. Among many Bantu-speaking communities and beyond, blacksmiths were required to undergo periods of seclusion after intense smelting or forging. During this time, they abstained from certain foods, avoided physical contact with others, and often slept apart. This wasn't superstition, it was spiritual hygiene. Historians still argue whether this practice evolved from metallurgical caution, iron dust, after all, can be toxic, or from social rituals reinforcing hierarchy and mystery. Either way, the impact was real. The smith wasn't just someone with skills, he was someone who'd touched the fire and brought something back. You sit cross-legged across from the old woman. She doesn't speak for a while, just looks at you. Her eyes are cloudy but focused. Finally, she says, "You carry the dust." You glance down at your hands. They are indeed still smeared with soot. "No," she says, shaking her head gently. "The other dust, the dust of fire's breath." Cool. You clear your throat. Ask if the chisel under your bedroll might be dangerous. She smiles, "Only if it likes you too much." That clears that up. She scoops herbs from the bowl and rubs them between her palms. The scent is sharp camphor and something else sour and rooty. She taps a pinch onto your forehead, then your chest, then presses your hands together. "This is for stillness," she says, "so your new voice does not echo too loud." It takes you a moment to realize what she means. She's not talking about your literal voice. She's talking about iron. You've entered a strange state in between. You're not a smelter, not a smith, not a villager, not a tourist, but you've touched the fire. That means something to the people, to the tools, maybe even to the metal itself. Quirky belief. Some cultures held that iron followed those who touched it in certain ways. Once you smelted ore or forged a blade, you couldn't go back to how you were. Not because others wouldn't let you, but because the iron wouldn't. The old woman hands you a small stone charm strung on a frayed cord. It's black-pitted, clearly iron-rich. You recognize it as a chunk of slag. Useless waste at first glance, but this one has been polished smooth and carved with a spiral. "For balance," she says. "Slag holds the memory of what didn't make it, keeps the pride from growing too tall." You nod. Outside, the wind shifts. You hear someone sharpening a blade on stone, a rhythmic scraping that matches the slow pulse of your own breath. You're told to stay in the hut until the third rooster cry. You're not sure what happens if you leave early. No one says. But you feel that invisible cord again, the one between you and the fire, between you and the iron. You lie down on the mat. The roof is low enough that your breath feels trapped, intimate, like it might swirl back into your lungs if you're not careful. You close your eyes, and in that dark you hear something you don't expect. Not a voice, not words, a hum, faint, metallic, like the echo of a bell rung yesterday. You press your hand to your chest. The chisel is not with you. It's outside where it belongs. But the sound, it's coming from inside you now. The third rooster cries just before dawn, rough, wheezy, like it's got something stuck in its throat. You sit up slowly in the isolation hut, your bones popping like wet kindling. It's colder now, dew clinging to the thatch, and your breath hangs lightly in the air. You feel clearer, emptier in a good way, like something got burned out of you in the night. You step outside. The village is waking. Smoke rises. Dogs stretch and shake, pots clatter. But it's not chaotic. There's a rhythm here, one you've come to recognize not just in fire and forging, but in everything. It's the rhythm of work becoming worship. You follow the sound of metal sharp staccato, not the wild crashing of smelting, but something more deliberate. You find the smiths under an awning, near the edge of the village, surrounded by iron. But not raw iron, shaped iron. Tools, blades, hooks, chisels, even a few objects you can't name, everything laid out in rows, like an orchestra tuning before the first note. And at the center of it all, the hammer and anvil. You take your seat quietly. The smith lifts a small blade, not a machete, shorter, thinner, more refined. He sets it on the anvil and strikes it with a curved hammer. The tone it gives off is perfect, not just sound, song. He smiles, ready. What follows next isn't smelting or shaping or naming. It's tempering. Mainstream metallurgical fact: after forging, iron tools must be tempered, heated to a lower temperature, and then cooled at a controlled rate to relieve internal stress, increase flexibility, and fine-tune hardness. Ancient African smiths may not have had thermometers, but they had color. A good smith could read temperature from the hue of heated iron, straw yellow for one hardness, deep blue for another. Historians still argue whether this knowledge came from direct experimentation or was passed down from earlier cultures. But modern studies of surviving African ironwork show remarkable consistency in edge retention and flexibility, signs of sophisticated tempering long before Europe began documenting its own techniques. Today you get to help. A small blade is placed into the forge nestled in the coals until it glows not red but a rich bronze yellow. When the smith nods, you lift it carefully with tongs and set it on the flat stone. The heat radiates through your gloves, and you feel time stretch as it cools. Then he says, "Now," and you plunge it into a bowl of oil. The blade hisses like a serpent. A thin smoke rises. You expect the village to back away, to act like something supernatural is happening. But no one flinches. They've heard this before. You inspect the blade afterward. It's darker now, hardened, quieter. The edge is sharp enough to whisper through wood. The smith grins. Now it'll last. He shows you another tool, a hoe blade with a thick base and a thin neck. This one, he says, we quench in mud. Slower cooling. Makes it bend, not break. You blink. You hadn't thought of that. Quirky detail. In some regions, iron tools were quenched in milk. Yes, real milk, believed to bless the tool with softness for harvest. Others used urine. You're not invited to try those today. You're okay with that. The rest of the morning is spent in sound. Tink, tink, psh, thunk, thunk, shh. Each tool is treated differently. Some cooled fast, some slow, some not at all. Each one is spoken to in the only language it understands: pressure, heat, timing. By midday, your ears are ringing, but not unpleasantly. It's like you've sat through a concert without instruments, just metal finding its voice. One of the older apprentices hands you a small blade, tempered and cooled. It's unfinished, no handle, rough edges, but it's yours to finish if you want. You've come this far, he says, might as well leave with something sharp. You sit with it for a while. The blade doesn't speak to you, but it listens. You carve a bit of softwood for the handle, shape it roughly, fit it, bind it with string and sap. It's not perfect, it's not even good, but it's yours. You press your thumb lightly to the edge. It sings. You place it beside your chisel, two pieces of iron, neither of which existed a few days ago. Two objects shaped not just by fire, but by the breath, sweat, and rhythm of people who've long since learned that creation isn't just about heat. It's about listening. The smith watches you pack up. Most forget this part, he says. They think smelting is everything. But fire without patience makes weapons, not tools. You nod. Because you understand now, iron doesn't just become strong in fire. It becomes strong in the silence after. Today you walk, not far, but far enough to feel the difference beneath your feet. The village fades behind you as the path turns rocky. You follow two men and a woman, all carrying long walking sticks with iron-tipped ends. One of them, tall, silent, with a grin like a flickering candle, tells you we're taking the iron home. Not back to the smelter, not to the forge, to where it belongs next. Because a tool doesn't live in a hut. It doesn't wait politely for its moment. It goes where it's needed. And today you follow one as it returns to earth. The woman carries a hoe, not a ceremonial one, not gold-plated or engraved, just a fresh blade, sharp and broad. It's wrapped in leaves, bound with reed, and she holds it like it weighs more than it does. You get the feeling this isn't her first delivery. You pass into fields scorched dry by last month's sun. Cracked earth, brittle stalks, tired banana trees leaning like they've given up. But she doesn't look worried. This is why we smelt, she says almost to herself. Not for gold, not for war, for this. She kneels and unwraps the blade. There's no fanfare, no drumbeat, just a short chant under her breath and a clean press into the soil. The hoe bites deep, and the field exhales. Mainstream fact: iron tools revolutionized agriculture across sub-Saharan Africa. Before their widespread use, digging sticks and stone tools made farming a grueling, limited endeavor. But iron plows and hoes changed that, making it possible to cultivate tougher soils, increase yields, and feed growing populations. This wasn't a slow drip of change. In many places, it was transformative. Iron wasn't just a convenience, it was survival. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of iron tools was driven by elite control, i.e., kings and chiefs hoarding metal, or by community-level sharing. In truth, it was probably both. But out here in the field, it's not about politics, it's about rhythm. You're invited to try. You step forward, take the hoe, and dig. At first you're awkward. You go too deep, then too shallow. Your foot slips. Someone laughs gently. Then you find it. That groove. That back and forth swing that feels less like chopping and more like breathing. The iron glides through the soil, carving neat furrows. You begin to understand why some people wept the first time they held one of these blades. Not because it was sharp. Because it made time bend. Because work that once took hours could now be done in minutes. Because pain could become progress. You pause, hand on the handle, breath caught. The woman smiles. See, it listens. She shows you how to turn the soil for water trapping, how to flip weeds without breaking roots, how to let the iron think before forcing it. You didn't know iron could think. But here you are being taught how to let it. Quirky tidbit: in several regions, especially in East Africa, iron hoes were passed down like family names. Not just heirlooms, they were witnesses. Farmers believed tools that had seen successful harvests would carry that luck into the next season. Some were even given offerings before planting. The woman points to a low mound at the edge of the field. That's where my grandfather buried his last hoe, she says. Before he died, he said, "It's tired. Let it sleep." You nod. You kind of get it now. The work continues in silence. Not the kind you fill with small talk, but the kind that buzzes with meaning. Each strike of the hoe is an offering. Each groove in the earth is a sentence. At one point, the man with the flickering grin mutters, "We should give the tool a name." The woman shakes her head. Not yet. Let it prove itself first. Even now, with all you've seen, the iron still has to earn its place. You return to the village as the sun starts its slow descent. The tool is wrapped again, its blade dirt-smeared but gleaming beneath the leaves. The woman turns to you before ducking into her hut. "Tomorrow," she says, "we shape iron for blood." You raise your eyebrows. "Spearhead," she explains. "Not every story has a harvest." And just like that, you understand something new. Iron doesn't choose peace or violence. People do. You don't sleep easily. Not because you're scared of what's next, You've already stood beside a roaring furnace, hammered glowing metal, and whispered a name to a chisel. What unsettles you tonight is subtler, the realization that iron has no allegiance. It feeds, protects, slays, tills. It cuts grain and it cuts flesh. You lie awake thinking not about tools but about choices. When morning comes, the forge looks different. There are no hoes laid out, no chisels, no bells of farming or household craft. Only long iron bars, rough forged and straight, resting on stones like sleeping snakes. A fire already burns low in the hearth, and the smith is sharpening something with a rhythm too crisp to be soothing. Today is for weapons. You join a small group gathered in the clearing, some familiar faces, some new. There's less laughter today, no jokes about blisters or crooked hammer strokes. The energy is serious heavy. A young man unwraps a bundle of cloth to reveal several spearheads unmounted. Each one tapers to a fine, dangerous point, some leaf-shaped, others barbed like fishhooks. They gleam even in shadow. You reach for one. A hand stops yours gently but firmly. They haven't been spoken to yet, the smith says. Right. This part requires a different kind of silence. Mainstream history lesson: iron weapons played a central role in the power structures of many African societies. From the Yoruba of West Africa to the Shilluk of Sudan, access to strong locally forged weapons could determine the outcome of conflicts, define borders, even elevate clans to kingship. But not all weapon making was for warfare. Many ceremonial spears, knives, and axes were made not to be thrown but to be seen as symbols of status, spirit, or protection. Historians still argue whether the divide between utilitarian and ritual weapons was clearly understood by smiths themselves, or whether that line blurred depending on who held the blade. Today, you learn that the forging is the same, but the intention changes everything. The smith places a blank spearhead into the coals. It glows, slowly, stubbornly. Unlike tool iron, which is softened and shaped with coaxing strokes, weapons demand edge. The hammering is sharper now, more aggressive. The blows are faster, more deliberate. The iron is struck to taper, to split, to threaten. You hear a different voice in the metal now, not a whisper, but a warning. You help turn the bellows. The fire responds greedily. You're sweating before the second round of heating is done. Then comes the detail work. One spearhead is twisted along its spine, forming a spiral shaft that ends in a narrow two-pronged tip. The smith explains it's ceremonial. For display during dances or rituals of oath-taking, it will likely never see combat, but it could. Quirky bit of lore. In some communities, weapons, especially spears, were dipped not only in water or oil, but in infusions of medicinal plants, animal blood, or even ground bone. It wasn't about metallurgy. It was about preparing the weapon's soul, giving it context, telling it what kind of weapon it was allowed to become. One spear you see today is set aside immediately after forging, not for sharpening, not for mounting. It's wrapped in red-dyed cloth and placed in a clay pot. Not for hands, someone whispers. You later learn it's a spirit blade used during burials or ancestral offerings, never wielded, never drawn. It's a presence, not a tool. And you start to understand not all iron is meant to be used. Some is meant to remind. You help clean the blades with sand and oil. Each one is handled with care as if alive. No one jokes. No one swings them around pretending to fight. The respect is absolute. The smith shows you how to mount a finished spearhead onto a wooden shaft. The wood is carved from a particular tree, chosen for its balance and its willingness to speak to iron. You chuckle at that until you're handed one that splinters under your grip. The smith nods. See? Didn't like you. You try again with a smoother piece. It fits. The binding is done with leather strips, soaked and stretched, then dried taut. Some are reinforced with thin copper wire. The result is sleek, beautiful, and terrifying. You hold the completed spear in your hands and feel something unfamiliar. Not pride, not fear. Weight. The weight of responsibility. The smith looks at you. Now he says, put it down. You obey, because that's part of the lesson too. Iron offers power, but only if you know when to set it aside. The next morning greets you with unexpected softness. After yesterday's sharp edges and tension-wrapped silence, you wake to a gentle breeze, the scent of roasting maize, and oddly enough, the sound of laughter. Actual laughter, the kind that bubbles up from someone's stomach unguarded. You follow the sound to the village's edge, where a group of children are gathered around an elder with wild hair and a necklace made entirely of flattened iron rings. He's balancing a strange lopsided compass on his knee, a disc of rusted metal mounted on a bone. It spins lazily, pointing nowhere, or maybe everywhere. What's that, you ask? He squints at you and grins. A memory, he says, also a magnet. The children squeal when he nudges it with a small iron pin, and the needle leaps to one side. He leans in, voice low. It still remembers where the mountain lives. And just like that, you're pulled into another layer of the story, the iron's sense of direction. Because as it turns out, not all iron is the same. Some pieces hum, some pull, some even twitch when left alone on a still surface. Today, you're learning about magnetism and the iron that seems to remember the stars. Mainstream fact: naturally magnetic iron ores like magnetite are found across parts of Africa and were likely known to ancient metalworkers, while no direct evidence proves large-scale compasses were used. Certain oral traditions reference iron that points, ore that listens, and metal that sings. Some modern researchers believe early ironworkers may have noticed these properties during smelting or tool making and maybe even used them informally for orientation or navigation. Historians still argue whether this amounted to a proto-compass or just poetic coincidence. But you're starting to believe that when iron wants to be strange, it doesn't ask permission. The elder hands you a small shard, curved, dark, warm, from his palm. It looks unremarkable, but when you place it on a smooth leaf floating in a bowl of water, it drifts to the same spot. Every time. That direction, he says, pointing past the trees, is where we find the singing rock. You blink. The what? He stands too fast for someone with that many decades in his spine and begins walking. Come, it's not far. You follow. The path winds through scrubby bush across dry creeks, under the low rustle of thorn trees. After maybe 20 minutes, you come to a rise of craggy rock. Nothing remarkable at first glance. But then he taps a section of the stone with his iron ring. Ding! The sound is rich, resonant, like striking a tuning fork. He smiles. This one hums when the fire's right. You're standing on what they call a memory stone, a deposit rich in metallic ore, some of it naturally magnetic, some just unusually responsive. The elder explains that smelters and smiths used to come here before each smelt, not to mine, but to listen. The stone tells us what the ore feels like that season, he says. Some years it's asleep, some years it bites. You crouch and try tapping it yourself, a slightly different tone. The elder nods solemnly as if it just told you a secret. You ask how often they come. Only before the first fire of the season, he says. Not before every smelt, only when it matters. He gestures toward the ground and points to faint circular carvings, spirals, starbursts, grids. These are maps, he says, for people who never wrote books. Quirky fact. In some African smelting traditions, rocks near furnace sites were inscribed with symbols or carved shallowly to create vibration patterns. Some researchers believe these may have been rudimentary mnemonic devices, tools for recalling ore qualities, fire rhythms, or smelting locations. Others think they're more spiritual invitations for the ancestors to listen. You rest your palm on the stone. It's warm, and in that moment, you realize something unexpected. This rock feels familiar, not because you've touched it before, but because it feels like it's been waiting to be touched. The elder says softly, iron is not just what you dig. Sometimes it's what speaks to you when nothing else does. You walk back slowly, carrying a few small pebbles from the site, not ore, not tools, just reminders. Back at the village, the children are still spinning the bone compass. One of them holds up a shard and says, "This one hums when it's happy." And you think maybe she's not wrong. You wake to smoke, but not the worrying kind. It's thin, sweet, and perfumed with burning bark and crushed herbs. A morning fire. The village is quiet again, but not in the way it was before the smelt. This is a different kind of silence. Grieving, but not panicked. More like something has been carried away and the wind hasn't decided what to bring back yet. You find out quickly one of the elders passed in the night. Not the blacksmith, not the bellows master, but a quiet figure who had helped mark the first spiral in the ground before the furnace was built. You realize you never even learned his name. His hut has been swept clean. A clay bowl of water sits outside his doorway. A blade rests beside it, not sheathed, not covered, just iron and earth. You ask someone if the tool was his. They shake their head. It's for the journey, they say. And that's when it hits you. Today you'll learn about the iron left behind. In many African traditions, iron wasn't just useful in life, it was necessary in death. A person's tools might be buried with them, broken deliberately to release their spirit, or placed whole if the dead were believed to continue working in the afterlife. Sometimes iron was even used as a key, a spiritual unlock for whatever came next. Mainstream fact: archaeological digs across Iron Age sites in Africa, especially in Nigeria, Sudan, and Zimbabwe, have revealed iron artifacts buried with the dead: spearheads, knives, bracelets, bells. Some were clearly ceremonial, others practical. Their presence suggests iron was part of the language of death as well as life. Historians still argue whether these burial practices reflect status. Rich people got more metal, or function metal was needed for the journey beyond. But what no one doubts is this iron went with you. You're invited to the farewell. Not a funeral, not exactly. You walk in procession with others to a quiet spot beneath a baobab tree, a natural sentinel, its roots tangled like veins. There's no coffin, just a woven mat, some offerings, calabash bowls, a cracked hoe, a few dried fish wrapped in leaves. And one more thing, a slag brick, square and black and dense as night. You recognize it immediately. It came from the same smelt you helped with days ago. You ask why it's there. Someone shrugs. He witnessed that fire. He should carry part of it with him. You realize they're not being poetic. They mean it. The blade from beside his door is brought forward. It's not broken. It's polished, wrapped in red cloth, and placed gently on the mat. A chant begins, not loud, not mournful, but rhythmic. It doesn't cry. It escorts. Then something curious happens. The village blacksmith steps forward and lays his own hammer on the earth just for a moment. He presses it into the dirt, then lifts it again. A symbolic offering. You ask what it means. He says, "To thank the man who gave me my first ore." Quirky practice. In some regions, especially among the Dinka and the Dogon elders who passed, were honored with iron shadows tools laid near their graves to reflect the work they had done or the fire they had passed down. These weren't grave goods meant for looting. They were messages. This person shaped the earth. After the ceremony, no one rushes away. The village lingers. A few people walk slowly to the forge, not to work, but to sit. You do the same. You find yourself staring at the slag brick again, heavy, useless to some, sacred to others. And suddenly you see the slag for what it really is, not waste. Record. It's what got burned off so something else could live. You ask the blacksmith what he does with his slag. He shrugs. Some I crush, some I bury, some I keep when the fire was hard. You ask why. He looks at you. Because iron forgets the flame, but I don't. You sit with that for a while, and by evening the silence has changed again. Not absence anymore. Echo. At first, it seems like a normal day, grinding millet, fixing fences, goats, doing goat things, but then you notice the pack animals being loaded. Donkeys, mostly a few shaggy cows, their backs draped with woven bags, baskets, and bundles tied with leather cords. You ask someone where they're going. Market, they say. But the way they say it, market carries more weight than you expect. You imagine a few people swapping yams and firewood. What you find instead is the beginning of a caravan. Because today, you're going to follow iron beyond the village, not just in memory, not in myth, in motion. They invite you to walk with them, and you do out along a narrow, rutted trail past termite towers and sun-bleached trees. The smell of dust and donkey sweat thickens as the sun rises. Someone hands you a gourd of water and tells you, "Stay left of the led goat." He thinks he's in charge. You obey. The caravan moves slowly but deliberately. The iron they carry is carefully chosen tools, spearheads, horseshoe-shaped currency pieces, iron bracelets, and long iron rods wrapped in cloth to prevent clanking that might disturb the ancestors or attract thieves. You pass smaller villages, wave to children, and start to realize this route isn't random. It's ancient. Mainstream fact. Long-distance iron trade routes crisscrossed medieval Africa, connecting smelting villages deep inland to powerful kingdoms along rivers and coasts. Iron from modern-day Nigeria, Mali, and Chad traveled north to the Maghreb, east to the Nile, and west toward the Atlantic. It was traded not just for food or cloth, but for gold, salt, and even human lives. Historians still argue whether these trade routes were formalized systems run by ruling elites or decentralized networks of kin and caravanners. But evidence of iron currency, standardized ingots, shaped like swords or bracelets, suggests a level of organization far beyond local barter. You stop near a crossroads where a group of strangers waits beneath a baobab tree. They nod in greeting, then begin to swap. There's no shouting, no haggling, just quiet negotiations, bundles lifted, weights compared, tools examined. A man offers a sack of dried kola nuts for 2 iron rods. A woman trades fabric dyed in deep indigo for a set of matching chisels. A boy offers a carved bowl and some smoked fish for a rusty blade. The smith shakes his head, too rusty. The boy shrugs. Worth a try. And then something catches your eye. An iron bracelet, not decorative, but thick, rigid, almost heavy enough to anchor a boat. You ask someone what it's for. Money, they say. Bride price, burial, boundary marker. Depends who you ask. Quirky detail. In many West African societies, iron was currency. These weren't coins, but standardized shapes, manillas, bracelet-like pieces, rods, or blade-shaped ingots. The value depended on the region, the shape, and the purity. In some places, you could buy a cow with 10 manillas. In others, it might take 50. You try to lift a small bundle of currency pieces. They're heavier than you expected, each one a little history lesson in your hands. You understand now value wasn't abstract. It was muscle, breath, and fire forged into metal. Someone nearby points at your chisel and blade still tied to your waist. Trade, they ask, holding up a carved gourd bowl. You smile, shake your head. Not yet. Not these. The caravan doesn't stay long, just a few hours. Then the loads are reshuffled, a few new goods added, and the slow trek continues. You ask where the rest of the iron is going. West, someone says. To the river, then north. You ask what happens there. They shrug. Kingdoms, gold, stories. You realize something important. Not everyone who works with iron smelts it. Not everyone who carries iron knows how to shape it. But everyone in this world knows that iron moves. It crosses distances. It crosses borders. It crosses languages. And as the sun sets and you return to the village, your feet sore and your back aching, you find yourself looking differently at the tools hung near the forge. Because they're not just tools. They're tickets. They're stories wrapped in metal, waiting to be carried to someone else's fire. The rain comes without warning. One moment the sky is dusty and the air hums with heat. The next it breaks open like a water jar kicked by a clumsy god. The village scatters with practiced speed. Mats are thrown over cookfires. Chickens shriek indignantly. You duck under the blacksmith's awning, water slapping the clay roof like a drumline. But the forge doesn't close. If anything, the smith looks pleased. Rain cools tempers, he says. Let's see if it cools kings. You ask what he means. And that's how you find yourself sitting cross-legged and soaked, learning about iron and power. Because while iron feeds the fields and anchors trade routes, it also forges authority. He begins to tell you stories, not from books, but from memory, the kind passed mouth to mouth, fire to fire. Stories of how iron made kings kneel. Mainstream fact. In many African kingdoms like Benin, Mali, Songhai, and Great Zimbabwe, control over iron production and access to smiths meant control over weapons, trade goods, and agricultural tools. Rulers who secured iron workers ensured their dominance. Those who lost them often lost everything else shortly after. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were truly independent power brokers or simply servants of the state. But oral traditions often speak of smiths who refused royal summons, who worked only for the community, or who were exiled for forging a blade that bit the wrong person. The smith wipes raindrops from a rusted blade beside him. Once a chief tried to control the fires here, he says, demanded a spearhead for every boy born, said it was tax. You raise your eyebrows, and, he grins, the smelters left. Just like that, he says. Took their bellows and walked to another village. Next season the chief had warriors, yes, but no hoes, no nails, no arrows, just anger. You're told it took 2 years for the chief to beg them back. And even then the smiths returned only under their own terms. A symbolic forging a plowshare shaped from a spearhead. The message was clear. You ask if that really happened. Parts of it, he says. The rest might have been sharpened. You laugh, then stop, because the stories keep coming. Tales of smiths forging false blades to fool rival tribes, of rulers hiding their blacksmiths from raiders, of a king who tried to melt down ancestral tools for gold, and whose entire grain harvest failed the next season. Quirky legend. In some regions, smiths were believed to carry curses in their tongues. If a king mistreated them, they could speak into the fire and twist the metal. Tools would break, spears would miss, plows would rot from the inside. You ask if that's true. The smith shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe we just made the bad ones badly on purpose. Either way, the outcome was the same. Kings learned to fear the men who could whisper to metal. The rain lightens and the smith lifts a small iron rod from beside the forge. He holds it up. This, he says, was given by a chief 3 valleys from here. Long ago, payment for a new set of farming tools. He taps the rod against the stone anvil. It rings sharp and clear. He called it his staff of peace. Because without it, without food, his people would have followed the man with the better hoe, not the bigger army. You begin to understand something deeper. Iron enabled power, yes, but it also leveled it. A sharp blade gives authority, but a sharp plow keeps people fed. And loyalty often follows full bellies, not flags. The smith looks out into the misty air. One warlord tried to ban all iron once, he says. Said it made people too independent. You lean forward. What happened? He snorts. He starved. You sit in the soft hush that follows. Raindrops fall slower now. Steam curls from the still warm forge. Somewhere a rooster finally gets brave and crows like it invented the morning. You look at your hands, still calloused from the bellows, still stained from the ore, and you wonder how many empires rose and fell because someone swung a hammer just slightly harder, because someone shared a blade instead of hoarding it, because someone somewhere trusted iron more than a crown. The smith hands you a small coil of iron wire, not for cutting, not for striking, just coiled. For remembering, he says. You tuck it into your satchel and say nothing, but you understand. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rings. You wake before dawn again, not because someone calls you, but because something in your body is now wired for fire. You're halfway out the door before you even realize the forge is still cold. Today is different. There's no smelting, no hammering, no trading. The blacksmith is nowhere in sight. Instead, the boy who first led you to the bloomery, the one with the quiet humming and the no-nonsense eyes, waves you over. He carries a walking stick, but not for style. Today, you're headed underground. You don't ask questions. You just follow. The path veers off the usual tracks, twisting between low hills and patches of thorn brush until you reach a subtle rise in the landscape. From a distance, it looks like a termite mound, but as you approach, you see a low stone wall surrounding a pit. The air here smells different, cooler, damper. Still, we dig here, the boy says. And so begins your lesson in navigation and memory beneath the soil. At first, it seems like a mining trip, but no one brings heavy tools, just short iron rods, a few sharpened sticks and leather pouches. This isn't industrial excavation, it's delicate, probing, almost intuitive. You watch as the boy kneels and presses his hand to the ground like he's reading a page. They say iron lives, where the birds sleep, he murmurs. You wait for an explanation. He points to a nearby tree, twisted leafless and covered in weaver bird nests, then to a line of termite hills rising in a crooked arc. You look for patterns, he says. Birds, mounds, shadows, sometimes just the taste of the dirt. Mainstream fact. In parts of medieval Africa, ore prospecting wasn't guesswork. It involved close observation of the land, local wildlife, and even the behavior of plants. Termites, for example, often built mounds on mineral-rich soil. Birds nested in specific trees that tended to grow near iron deposits. Some prospectors even used taste or smell to locate oxidized soil. Historians still argue whether these were formal systems of geological knowledge or just inherited intuition passed through generations. Either way, they worked. The boy drives his rod into the earth with a quiet thud and listens, pulls it back, sniffs it, nods. You try. Your rod hits something hard. You dig a bit, no ore, just root. He chuckles. Try again. Think like a mole, not a hammer. It's not a bad motto, actually. Soon you're both digging, slowly pulling away chunks of reddish clay. Small fragments of blackened rock begin to appear. Iron nodules, oxidized and rough. They look like nothing special, but to him, there are music. You're handed one to taste. It's gritty, metallic, oddly sour. He watches your face and grins. You found it. You're invited to help map the spot. Not with paper, with pebbles and charcoal. A small square is drawn into the dirt. Pebbles mark mounds. Lines indicate tree shadows. Charcoal smudges show where test rods struck something solid. You realize this is a memory map, not for you, for others. When the rains come and wash the surface clean, this little constellation of marks will be the only record of the find. Quirky tradition. Some prospectors created ore maps using dried gourds filled with pebbles, each one corresponding to a sound the digging rod made. Others tied strings with knots spaced to match known distances between landmarks. One group near Lake Chad reportedly used birdsong at dawn to triangulate ore sites. You ask how many of these maps exist? The boy shrugs. They're made when needed. They're forgotten when not. By midday, your hands are stained again, not from heat, but from earth. You sit in the shade eating a strip of dried goat meat and think about how little iron reveals itself. It hides in plain sight in red dirt, in termite trails, in tree shadows, but only to those patient enough to see sideways. Anyone can dig, the boy says, chewing, but to remember where to dig again, that's the real trick. You ask what happens if someone forgets. He looks out over the land where the hills roll gently into the haze. Then iron sleeps. You understand now finding ore isn't just a skill. It's a relationship. And like any relationship, it's built on signs, patience, and not pushing too hard. That evening, back in the village, you look up at the stars and wonder how many ancient maps have been drawn not with ink, but with footsteps. How many veins of iron still lie untouched because someone misplaced the pebble that pointed the way. How much of the Earth's memory has been forgotten simply because no one asked nicely. The sun beats harder today. No breeze, no clouds, just that dry, pressing heat that makes the iron tools lying in the sun look like coals themselves. But no one rests. You step into the main clearing and feel the tension before you even hear the word. Tax. A man stands beside a clay jar filled with iron nails, his arms crossed, his mouth tight. A few others have formed a half circle around him, quiet, watchful. A village elder is counting the nails. You ask someone what's happening. Tribute, they say. To whom? The road chief. And suddenly you're neck deep in the economy of iron. This isn't the first time you've heard about tribute systems, but this is the first time you see it up close, how iron moves not just through trade or war or work, but through obligation, through pressure, through debt. Mainstream fact. In many pre-colonial African kingdoms, iron wasn't just an economic resource, it was a fiscal instrument. Tribute paid in iron tools, currency rods, or raw blooms was used to support ruling elites, maintain roads, or fund warfare. In regions with few coin economies, iron became a standardized form of taxation, especially after harvest seasons or successful smelts. Historians still argue how voluntary these payments truly were. Some view them as cultural exchanges embedded in tradition, others as early systems of coercion. But one thing is clear: where iron accumulated, power followed. Today, the tax is modest: one nail or knife blade per household, twice per year. It doesn't sound like much, until you remember what it takes to make even a single nail, or fire bellows breath, sweat, and time. One nail isn't just a piece of iron. It's hours of labor, days of listening, weeks of memory. You watch as people approach, quietly laying their offerings into the jar: small chisels, horseshoe rods, even a few manila bracelets. One man contributes a single well-forged nail wrapped in cloth. The elder unwraps it slowly and nods. "Good iron," he says. Another man, older, with cracked hands and a limp, offers a warped blade. The elder frowns but takes it. There's no punishment, just disappointment. Later you find out that bad offerings don't always go to waste. They're melted down, recast, but they're also noted. Some chiefs have long memories. Then comes the trade twist. Instead of simply carting the offerings off to a palace or a fort, a portion of the tribute is redistributed right there in front of everyone. You watch as a smith receives 3 of the better tools back. Payment for his firewood, someone whispers. A hunter gets 2 for the meat shared during the last smelt. It's not fairness, but it's not theft either. It's redistribution, messy, imbalanced, but rooted in a kind of memory that moves through people instead of paper. Quirky economic detail. In some regions, tribute wasn't just paid in finished tools. Raw blooms, partially forged blades, and even bags of slag were acceptable if the source was trusted. Why? Because the tribute wasn't always about utility. It was also about presence, proof that the fire still lived in the village. You look into the jar. One of the items catches your eye: a spiral twisted iron rod, the kind used for currency. You ask where it's going. North, someone says. To the salt traders. Ah, salt. That other precious mineral. You remember iron moved with salt. Not always as equal partners. Sometimes iron was more valuable, sometimes less, but always together. Salt preserved life. Iron protected it. In some trade networks, they were practically siblings. You think of the sweat from bellows, the taste of iron on your tongue from the prospecting site, the salty goat meat you chewed beside the memory stone. Iron and salt, fire and flesh. You're beginning to see the systems now, not just how iron is made, but how it moves, how it feeds, how it's counted, how it's judged. That night, over a low fire, someone tells a story. Once a village refused the iron tax, said they were too tired, too poor, too dry. You ask what happened. The tax collector left empty-handed. That night, a storm came. Lightning hit the forge. The bellows split open like they'd been struck by a spear. You raise an eyebrow. Coincidence. Someone shrugs. Maybe, or maybe iron doesn't like being forgotten. By now your hands are calloused, your ears ring faintly from 100 hammers, and you've learned to recognize the moods of fire, restless, hungry, sulking. But today, you don't make anything new. Today you watch something old become something else. The smith greets you with a bundle wrapped in leather. He lays it on the stone beside the forge and unwraps it gently as though it's alive. Inside a broken hoe blade, 2 rusted knives, and a bent chisel that might have once been yours. You're not sure. They all look tired. We don't throw iron away, he says. We remind it. Welcome to recycling and rebirth, the iron afterlife. He sorts the pieces quickly. Some are too far gone, thinned by rust, snapped clean through, eaten hollow by time and rain. These are set aside, not with disdain, but with care. You'll learn about their fate later. The rest. Still listening, he says. Mainstream fact. Iron recycling was common in many African ironworking cultures. Tools that broke weren't discarded. They were reforged, reshaped, repurposed. A spearhead became a sickle. A hoe blade became a carving knife. Sometimes the process was practical, other times ritual. Nothing was wasted. Historians still argue whether this reflects scarcity of materials or deeper spiritual beliefs. Probably both. Iron was never just a thing, it was a relationship. And relationships get second chances. The forge is lit with a gentle fire today, not the full-bellied rage of a smelt, but a cooking fire, slow, steady. The smith adds crushed charcoal, stokes it with a whisper, and sets the bent chisel in. He doesn't melt it. He coaxes it. Iron, when reforged, behaves like an old warrior returning to battle, stiff, proud, but willing. He works the blade slowly, straightening, tapping, heating again. With every strike, the sound becomes more musical. Relearning, he says, it remembers how to be strong. You ask why this piece deserves another life. He replies, because the last life was used. That matters. One of the knives is reshaped into a ceremonial blade, not for harvest, but for naming rituals. The broken hoe becomes a short pruning hook. The smith doesn't just change their shape, he changes their purpose. You think about your own life, about all the tools, jobs, dreams you've thrown away because they were bent or dulled. You wonder what it would mean to shape them into something else instead. Then you remember the pieces that were set aside, the ones beyond saving. You ask what happens to those. The smith points to a clay pot behind the forge. Inside, crushed rust, slag dust, fragments of iron no longer whole. It looks like dirt, but darker, denser. He lifts a pinch and sprinkles it around the forge like salt. We give it back to the fire, he says, so it can feed the next thing. Quirky belief. In some smelting traditions, broken iron was ground and added to the next ore batch, not for efficiency, but as a kind of ancestor offering. The idea was that new tools would carry the strength of old ones. Some even claimed tools made this way lasted longer because they were born from experience. The smith hands you the reforged chisel. It's not perfect, still carries a faint warp, but it fits in your hand better than before. You carried it once, he says, now it carries you. You press your thumb against the edge. It's sharper than it looks. He's not done. He brings out something new, an amulet forged from nail scrap. Twisted iron no more than a few inches long, shaped like a spiral with a hole in the center. For hanging, he says, over a doorway or your heart. You ask what it does. Reminds, he replies, that everything breaks, but not everything is lost. You pocket it. The day ends with no flames, no forging, no fanfare, just cooling iron, the hush of a spent forge, and the knowledge that not every fire is for starting something new. Some fires exist just to let things begin again. You dream in fire again, not the roaring furnace kind, but soft flickers, coals glowing in the dark, like eyes watching from beneath the earth. You hear a voice, not words, just rhythm, a bellows beat, a hammer fall, the pulse of something ancient waking up. When you open your eyes, the forge is still cold, and the village is quiet. but someone's waiting for you. It's the boy from the prospecting site. He stands with a basket of herbs and a curious expression. Come, he says. You have to dream properly this time. You blink. Wasn't that already dreaming? He shrugs. That was the warm-up. You follow him through the forest deeper this time until the trees lean together in that conspiratorial way that tells you something's been waiting here a long time. The air grows heavy, quiet, not dead, just attentive. At the center of a grove stands a low stone circle, half sunk in moss. Inside, nothing. No fire, no altar, just a smooth patch of earth and the faint scent of rain that never fell. This, the boy says, is where they used to come when the fire talked back. Welcome to the dream of iron. He doesn't explain further. He simply lays out the herbs, grinds them with a stone, and mixes them with warm water in a shallow bowl. Drink this, he says. You hesitate. He tilts his head. You drank molten history last week. What's a root tea going to do? Fair point. It tastes like mud and crushed metal. Not pleasant, but not painful either. Just deep, like your tongue has dropped into a well. You sit, breathe, close your eyes. And then, you're not in the forest anymore. You're back at the forge, but it's different. Larger, wilder. The flames spiral in ways no wind could shape. The tools hanging on the walls are moving slowly, shifting, stretching. You reach for your chisel, and it hums. Then you hear a voice, not in your ears, but behind your ribs. You know how to shape us. And then fainter. But do you know why? Mainstream cultural observation. In several African metallurgical traditions, smiths and smelters were believed to receive visions, dreams about where to find ore, how to solve forging problems, or even what kind of tool the village needed most. These dreams were not optional, they were considered part of the work. Some smiths fasted before a major smelt, others slept beside the forge. The fire spoke if you were quiet enough. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual insight or clever subconscious problem-solving, but in practice, it didn't matter. The dreams worked. In your vision, a woman made of copper turns to face you. Her skin is cracked like dry slag, her eyes glowing coals. She holds out a blade. It's not sharp. It's folded. A spiral. A symbol you've seen carved in memory stones, painted in forge ash, whispered by children. What do you want iron for? She asks. You try to answer. To build, to farm, to protect. She shakes her head. No, what do you mean with it? You sit in that question, and then you wake. The boy is still there. The herbs are packed up. The forest is still. He looks at you waiting. You nod. Good, he says. Some people just dream of fire. You dreamed of choice. You walk back in silence, but your feet feel different. Heavier, like the ground now recognizes your weight. Quirky belief. Some smelters were buried with their bellows or their hammers because it was said they'd be asked by the ancestors to build again in the afterlife. But only the ones who dreamed well would be trusted with that task. You wonder if your dream would have passed the test. That night, you don't light a fire. You sit with your blade, your chisel, your little spiral amulet, and let them rest beside you not as tools, but as listeners. Because maybe you're not the one shaping them anymore. Maybe they're shaping you. You can tell something's wrong the moment you step outside your hut. It's too quiet. Not the kind of silence that follows ceremony or dreaming, but a brittle, uneasy quiet like the air is waiting to see what you'll do. The forge is cold. The smelter's pit is empty. The smith's awning is gone, collapsed in the night, trampled or torn down. You're not sure. No one will look you in the eye. You find the boy finally sitting on a rock, turning a cracked bellows handle in his hands. They've come, he says, voice flat. Who? He doesn't answer, just gestures to the hill. And there they are. 2 men, 3 ox carts, and the flag of somewhere else. Today you learn what happens when outsiders try to take the flame. The men aren't soldiers, not quite, but they carry themselves like people who expect not to be refused. Their tunics are starched, their boots are clean. One of them carries a notebook, the other wears gloves. You know the type. You've seen the movies, you've read the history, and suddenly you're standing inside it. Mainstream fact. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial powers, especially the British, French, and German administrations, disrupted or outright banned traditional ironworking across large swaths of Africa. Official reasons ranged from environmental protection, cutting too much wood for charcoal, to safety concerns. But the real motives were clear: economic control, dependency on imported tools, and the erasure of indigenous knowledge systems. Historians still argue how deliberate this was, whether it was bureaucratic laziness, economic strategy, or cultural arrogance. But the effect was devastating. Centuries-old traditions were silenced, knowledge chains broken, tools replaced by imports, fires put out. Permanently. You hear the taller man speaking with the village elder. His tone is too cheerful, the kind of cheerful that's designed to disarm. "We'd like to purchase your iron," he says. "In exchange, we can provide factory-made tools, knives, plows, matches, very efficient." He gestures to the crates on the carts. You see glints of polished steel, plastics, manufactured shapes that look alien among the earth tones and hand-forged blades around you. The elder doesn't respond, so the man smiles wider. "We can also offer coin or salt, whatever's easiest. We're just here to help." You feel sick because you realize what this is. This isn't a trade offer, it's a replacement. The shorter man wanders toward the forge remains. He squats beside the collapsed awning, picks up a nail, sniffs it, tosses it aside. You see the way his eyes catalog everything: the furnace scars, the slag pits, the bellows ash. Still smelting, he asks someone nearby casually. No one answers. He nods, scribbles something in his notebook, and walks on. And then worse, he turns to you. "You've been working here, yes?" You say nothing. He steps closer. Fascinating place. Very picturesque. But of course you know there are more efficient ways to extract iron now. No need for all this ritual. You blink slowly, and then smile in that way people do when they're deciding whether to scream or spit. "Tell me," you say, "can your factory tools hear the fire sing?" He laughs. Charming. You walk away before he can finish whatever else he was going to say. Later someone tells you the men will stay for a day, just observing, just documenting, just evaluating opportunities. Quirky, brutal fact. In some regions, colonial administrators confiscated bellows and tuyères. In others, they forced blacksmiths to register or license their forges. In still others, they ordered the furnaces destroyed entirely, claiming they were dangerous or unhygienic. In some cases, oral historians tell of smelters who chose to bury their tools rather than let them be taken. That evening, the forge is quietly recovered, not rebuilt. Just hidden. Ash swept back into place, tools bundled in cloth, bellows stashed behind huts. A small child walks by dragging a wooden toy shaped like a plow. She glances at the carts, then at the sky. You ask the blacksmith what he's going to do. He shrugs. "Wait, remember, teach someone else later." He pats the anvil. Fire sleeps, doesn't die. You sit with that. You remember the memory stone, the taste of ore, the tools you helped name. You touch the spiral amulet at your chest and feel a faint hum. And you understand something bitter and beautiful all at once. What cannot be bought cannot be stolen. Not fire, not rhythm, not memory, not you. By the next morning, the strangers are gone. Just like that. No fanfare, no shouting, no violent departure. Just a few empty crates, a broken boot print in the ash near the forge, and a trail of ox cart grooves leading out of the village like a line drawn by someone who doesn't know what they just erased. And yet nothing is gone, not really. Because today the forge breathes again, but differently. Not to smelt, not to trade, not even to shape tools. Today the fire burns for rescue. You're introduced to a new visitor, not a colonial agent or a trader, but an archaeologist. A quiet man with thick, calloused fingers and a pack heavy with notebooks. He doesn't speak much, but he listens like someone trying to hear the past, walking in the grass. He crouches beside a mound of slag near the edge of the village, brushes it gently with a short reed broom, smiles. "This," he says, "is a sentence." You raise an eyebrow. A sentence, he repeats. A statement, a moment, a "we were here." And that's your entry point into rescue archaeology, the last embers of memory before the road builders come. Mainstream fact. Across sub-Saharan Africa, dozens of smelting sites, some centuries old, have been unearthed by archaeologists racing against time. Roads, farms, and construction projects threaten to bury what fire once revealed. These rescue missions aren't about treasure, they're about recording, documenting furnaces, slag piles, broken tuyères, and fragments of tools before they're lost forever. Historians still argue over priorities. Should effort go into preserving a few key sites, or spreading wide to catalog as much as possible before everything disappears? Meanwhile, local communities often carry memory that no excavation can find. The archaeologist walks you to a shallow depression where weeds have overtaken old furnace walls. He holds out a piece of broken ceramic, clearly part of a tuyère. You recognize the curve, the vented tip. 15th century, maybe, he says. Might have blown air through that same hole you worked with last week. You hold it. It's smooth on one side, burned on the other, still warm in the mind, if not in the hand. You ask how they date it. Charcoal fragments in the slag, he replies. Radiocarbon, also shape placement echoes. You blink. Echoes, he smiles. When we dig carefully enough, sometimes the ash patterns tell us where the fire burned hottest, where someone stood, where the bellows rhythm fell off. You kneel beside him, look at the slope of the pit, the faint outlines of brick. And for the first time you realize this isn't just excavation. It's listening. Quirky, real practice. In some cases, modern archaeologists work directly with village elders, not just for permission, but for insight. Elders point out sacred slag heaps. They name stones. Some even remember where their grandfathers smelted, based not on writing, but on dreams. One archaeologist wrote of an elder who correctly predicted which part of a hill held buried tuyères purely from a story his father once told. You ask the archaeologist if he believes those stories. He shrugs. I believe the slag. Fair enough. You walk with him across 3 more sites. Some are barely visible, just ash patches, glassy black soil, charred wood. Others are larger full furnaces, caved-in bellows frames, petrified by time. These will be gone soon, he says. New road coming through, they'll bulldoze half this hill. You feel your jaw tighten. Can't they build around it? He laughs. Have you ever tried to explain sacred slag to a cement contractor? You want to rage, but instead you kneel and begin brushing away dirt. The two of you work silently until the sun dips low. You uncover a rusted iron knife bent into a spiral. It's tiny, decorative, a child's, maybe. He picks it up with both hands, not for science, for reverence. Someone made this, he says, for no reason but love. You ask what will happen to it. He doesn't know. Maybe a museum, maybe a drawer, maybe it goes back in the earth. That night, you help the villagers cover one of the older furnaces with woven mats and stone markers, not to hide it, not to abandon it, but to protect it. Because some things don't need to be dug up. Some things just need to be remembered. You wake to the scent of varnish and museum polish. Well, not literally. But everything today smells like preservation, like labels and lighting, like clean glass and the absence of dust. Because you're not in the village anymore. You're in a museum, not a grand one. Not a European hall echoing with school tours and audio guides. This is small, quiet, half forgotten by the capital city it's folded into. But inside, tucked beneath fluorescent lights and a too-cold ceiling fan, is a furnace. Or half of one. Its clay walls sag inward like a tired sigh. A plaque beside it reads, Reconstructed Iron Furnace, West Africa, approx. 14th, 17th century. Below it, a note donated by field researchers, 1979. You stand in front of it and you don't know what to feel. Because you know this shape. You know the curve of that shaft. The 2 holes, the soot-struck rim. You've lit that fire, fed it, breathed with it. But this one's silent. Mainstream fact museums around the world host reconstructed iron furnaces from African dig sites. Some were transported piece by piece. Others rebuilt from drawings and fragments. While well-intentioned, many displays offer limited context. The furnace becomes an artifact severed from sound, scent, song, ritual, and rhythm. Historians still argue over how to best represent metallurgical heritage in institutions. Is reconstruction a way of honoring the fire or freezing it? You walk the exhibit. Iron currency manillas hang on hooks tagged with barcodes. Spears lie flat behind glass, their points dulled for safety. A pair of bellows, real ones with animal hide and carved handles, are staged on a platform with no fire between them. They look embarrassed, like props in a play that forgot its script. You read every plaque. They talk about technological ingenuity, pre-colonial production methods, early industry, but none mention the sweat, the dancing children, the dreaming, the whispers. No one talks about what iron feels like. A child walks past, holding her mother's hand. She pauses in front of the furnace, looks in. It's empty, she says. And it is. You walk to the back of the room where a case holds smaller pieces, rusted knives, worn, chisels, a bundle of iron rods twisted like vines. Some are labeled unknown use, some have no label at all. You recognize one shape, a spiral hammered from scrap, exactly like the charm the smith gave you. You lean in. The tag reads, Iron Amulet, possible ritual significance. Possible. Quirky truth. Many African iron artifacts in museums are unprovenanced. Their original location, use, and maker unknown. Some were collected without consent. Others were bought, bartered, or simply taken. As a result, their stories remain fragmented. The object survives. The meaning doesn't always follow. You ask the museum guide if the furnace was ever lit. She smiles politely. Of course not. It's delicate. You want to ask how a fire can be preserved if it's never allowed to burn. But you don't. Instead, you sit on the bench across from the furnace and close your eyes. And in that hum of fluorescent light, you try to remember the rhythm, the bellows, the heat that kissed your face before the bloom formed. You remember the elder whispering to the fire, the girl naming her blade, the boy pressing his hand to the earth, the forge that sang, the memory stone that rang like thunder. You remember that iron is never just display. It's dialogue, a relationship forged between body and earth, between purpose and story. You reach into your satchel and feel the amulet spiral, still cool, still coiled, still yours. You think of taking it out, leaving it here, but you don't, because this isn't the right resting place. Not yet. Maybe someday, a different museum will exist, one with fire, with rhythm, with names, not lost. Maybe not behind glass. But for now, you walk back out into the sun, blinking, squinting, carrying a piece of the fire inside you. Not curated, just remembered. You return to the village, and everything is quieter than you left it, but not still, not forgotten. The forge hasn't been rebuilt yet, but someone has drawn a spiral in the dust, near where the bellows used to rest. Children play around it, careful not to step inside the lines. Someone's left a small hammer in the center, laid flat like a seed. The blacksmith greets you with a nod, like no time has passed. You saw the museum. You nod. Let me guess, he says. It had tools with no names and a fire that doesn't burn. You nod again. He chuckles. At least they tried. Today, you help with a different kind of fire, not for smelting or forging, but for teaching. There are 6 of them, maybe 7, teenagers. All elbows, quiet eyes, and nervous energy. One wears a blade-shaped pendant around his neck. Another already carries a burn scar on his forearm. Your people. They gather around the blacksmith as he lays out his tools, not for show, for use. He points to each one, says its name. Then he asks them to name them again. Some stumble, some joke. One girl gets every name right, even the old ones. And so begins the rekindling. Mainstream truth. In many parts of Africa today, blacksmithing and smelting are being retaught carefully, slowly, by artisans, scholars, and families who refuse to let the fire go out. Some use replicas, some rediscover techniques through trial and error. Others use fragments, old songs, broken tools, diagrams sketched from memory. The work is slow, often underfunded, but it continues. Historians still debate how much of the original methods can be retrieved. But in villages like this, no one seems worried about perfect replication. They're worried about continuity, about remembering enough to start again. You help show the students how to twist a blade for balance, how to feel the talking spot on the anvil. One girl strikes the metal and frowns. "Too high," she says. The blacksmith grins. "Good, try again." You see one boy whisper to the bloom like the elders used to. You don't ask what he said. You already know it wasn't for you. There's no furnace yet, but the forge has been cleared. The stones realigned. The tuyere molds have been dug out of storage and laid in the sun. The spiral in the dust now curves wider, encircling not just the forge, but the new hands standing around it. A younger boy runs past and trips on a coil of iron. Everyone laughs, including him. When he stands, the blacksmith helps him up and presses a scrap of bloom iron into his hand. "You drop this," he says. The boy's eyes widen like he's just been handed fire itself. Quirky revival note. Some communities now initiate new smiths with fragments of broken tools, never whole ones. It's a symbolic reminder. Your first lesson is that nothing is finished and everything begins again. The girl who got all the tool names right asks to shape her first blade. The blacksmith hands her a rod of scrap and she hesitates. "It's crooked," she says. "Like all good beginnings," he replies. You spend the afternoon guiding, correcting, stepping back. There are mistakes. A blade warps, a chisel cracks. One kid drops a tuyere into the fire pit and immediately panics. No one shouts, they just try again. You sit beside the forge as the sun sets. The students are tired, soot-faced, proud. The spiral in the dirt now trails off into new lines, shapes you didn't draw, paths you didn't plan. The blacksmith leans over and says quietly, "I used to think the fire came from the furnace, but it doesn't." He taps his chest, then points to the students. "It comes from remembering, from telling, from letting the next hand be clumsy until it finds the right rhythm." You nod, but he's not done. "Fire can die," he says, "but a story only if you stop telling it." The last bellows stroke of the evening is slow like a long breath out. The coals dim. The forge rests. But the students don't leave. They linger. They're not ready to stop learning, and neither are you. You wake before dawn one final time. The village is quiet but not asleep, more like a hand resting just before a strike. You hear movement, coals being stirred, bellows creaking into position, tools being lined up with the same reverence given to ancestral bones. Today is your last fire. You know this because no one tells you. They just act like you know. The forge has already been lit. The students from yesterday are here, hands dusted with charcoal, eyes sharper than before. The girl who named the tools stands where you once stood by the bellows. The boy with the burn scar now shapes scrap iron with real confidence. The blacksmith doesn't hover anymore. He just watches. He nods at you. Today, you finish what you started. You're handed your blade. The one you started back when you could barely swing a hammer without flinching. It's been reheated, refiled, tempered, waiting for its final pass across the stone. You sit beside the sharpening slab and begin. Each pass is a memory. You remember the ore in the boy's basket, the bloom pulled from the furnace like a newborn, the hammering, the naming, the spearheads, the marketplace, the tribute, the magnet that spun with no wind, the blade that was too good to throw away, the one that wasn't good enough to keep, the foreign men with their clean boots and plastic blades, the elder who never raised his voice but bent fire to his will. the amulet tucked into your satchel, still coiled and cool, still whispering, begin again. You sharpen your blade until it sings, and then you stop, because it's done, not perfect, but true. Mainstream reality. Most people who learned African ironworking in the modern day did so not in neat apprenticeships, but in fragments, picking up tools left behind, stories, half-remembered rituals adapted for survival. No pristine archives, just hands that knew enough to try. Historians still argue whether these revivals are authentic, whether what's being rebuilt today counts as real tradition. But no one who has struck iron with bare feet in the dust, sweat stinging their eyes, would ever call it fake. Because truth doesn't always survive in records. Sometimes it survives in rhythm, in scars, in ash, quirky closing tradition. In some villages, a blade forged by a guest is never sold. It's stored with the family tools occasionally used, but mostly kept as a house memory. A reminder that fire can pass through strangers and still belong. You offer your blade to the blacksmith. He weighs it in his hand, then nods. He calls the students over. Who wants to name this one? The girl steps forward. She touches the blade. Ngumu, strong, in Kiswahili, in Mande, in Dagare, in every tongue that survived the smoke. She hands it back to you. For remembering, she says. You wrap the blade in cloth, and just like that, you know it's time. You walk through the village, slowly touching the trees, the empty smelter, the mat you once sat on to learn how to be quiet. You walk past the spiral drawn in the dirt. It's still there, though the edges have blurred. You don't fix it. You leave it. That's someone else's job now. You reach the edge of the village, and for a moment, you hesitate. But only for a moment. Because you're no longer carrying just a blade. You're carrying the rhythm. You're carrying the choice. You're carrying the fire. And it's ready to go home with you. And now, as the last coals dim and the forge settles into its hush, let yourself breathe slower. Let the warmth of the story drift down from your shoulders and settle gently around your chest. Feel the weight of iron ease into something softer, something less about labor and more about connection. Because even though the furnace has gone quiet, it hasn't gone cold. You walked through fire, yes, but not alone. You learned to listen to breath, to stone, to soil. You saw that iron was never just a thing to be struck. It was a rhythm to be felt, a silence to be honored, a memory to be carried. And you carry it now, in your hands, in your sleep, in your breath. Let your body grow heavier like a tool cooling after work. Let your thoughts settle like slag at the bottom of the fire pit, unneeded now. Let go of questions and let the hush between hammer strikes become your lullaby. The forge is resting. So can you. Sleep deeply, apprentice. The ancestors are still whispering in the coals. And they'll be there only when you wake. End of script. Sweet dreams.